Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Karam, board certified facial plastic surgeon. I specialize in facial rejuvenation, which basically means I help you look as young as you feel. We're going to talk about a very, very interesting and important question that I think is going to end up saving you probably a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of frustration. The question is, are there any alternatives to a facelift? 100% understandable why a question like this would come up. I mean, who wants to go through surgery, go through recovery, the expense, if there is a way to avoid it. So let's kind of break it down. So what are the categories of things that are available in the non-surgical realm of facial rejuvenation that would potentially be alternatives to a facelift? So category number one is the non-surgical facelift, or some people call it the liquid facelift. It's basically the use of fillers and volume to correct the changes associated with facial aging. So let's back up just 1 second and break this down. The understanding of what is happening to the face that would lead a person to thinking that they need a facelift. So typically what ends up happening is the fascia in the face starts to get longer, and it starts to get longer starting anywhere in the early 40s to mid 40s to late 40s. You start to see those changes happening. And what that leads to is a transition from a heart-shaped face or an upside down triangle to a square or a rectangular shaped face. So that's the fundamental thing. That's the thing that when you look in the mirror or see photos, videos, selfies, you name it, you look at yourself and you're like, geez, something is starting to change and I should do something about it. It's fascia getting longer. Now, what is a non-surgical filler-based approach? So basically what you're using the fillers in this case for is to try to lift the jawline, lift the neck, bring everything back up. And the typical strategies are you fill in the cheeks, you fill in the jawline, you try to bring these areas out so it kind of pulls things up. Well, we've tried for about 10, 15, maybe 20 years now. I lose track of time. It's been a long time since I've been in this field, but what we have seen and learned is that volume is one part of the aging process, but it's not the part that has anything to do with laxity. So filling the face to try to deter the need of doing a facelift is not going to cut it. And what we have seen in place of that is these very distorted, very unnatural looking faces that have really, really heavy cheeks and very wide and masculine looking jawlines. That's not necessarily rewinding the clock, right? So a big X in the filler category as a alternative. And when I say filler, I'm talking about Juvederm, Restylane, hyaluronic acid fillers. I'm talking about Sculptra. I'm even talking about fat transfer. These are not alternatives to lifting the face back up into position. Let's go into the next category. So the next category is energy devices. So what are energy devices? Energy devices are things that are going to be bringing some type of heat to the deeper layers in hopes to shrink it and really bring things back up. And what are the categories of energy devices? They're basically Ultherapy, Thermage, Morpheus 8. Now, on paper it sounds really good. In theory it sounds really good. The problem is that when you look at the anatomy of the face, what you have is you have skin, then you have fat, then below that you have fascia, then below that you have facial nerves and important arteries and vessels and different things like that. So when you're thinking that the aging process happens at the fascia level, well, what's right below the fascia is all the facial nerves, the stuff that moves your face, allows you to smile and blink and animate and all those kind of things. So when you're putting heat into the tissue, if you want to really get down to the level that's actually going to shrink, you have to basically be super precise and get down to that fascia level. Problem is, if you go a little too deep, well, you've knocked out some facial nerves, you've done some real damage. So what happens is typically these devices, they end up going more shallow at the level of the skin, but what's right underneath the skin? Facial fat. The facial fat that gives the face that kind of supple, soft look. Well, if you put heat into a stick of butter, what happens? It melts it. Same thing happens when you put heat at the level of the skin fat, you begin to break it down. So a lot of people have noticed, number one, they're getting basically no result out of these energy devices in terms of tightening. But a lot of people have noticed that their facial fat seems to be diminishing. They look like they're losing volume. It's pretty consistent across the board. We hear and see a lot of people complaining about that. But more importantly, we never really hear about a major result coming from this type of energy device. Then some people think using lasers, like CO2 lasers, for example, is gonna tighten up the face. Well, where's the CO2 laser work? It works at the most superficial layer of the skin. So that's not gonna tighten up the fascia layer. So energy devices that are going to penetrate the skin and get into that in-between layer in that subcutaneous fat, that's going to create all sorts of problems with the fat loss. Not going to get to the money layer, and then if you get to the money layer, you're just a millimeter away from facial nerves and things like that. So, you're going to run the risk of knocking those out, which most people, as technicians, don't want to risk that type of injury, so they keep it superficial, and ultimately no result is seen. So I don't see a way around that problem. I don't see a way to make these devices work better. We've literally never had a single one of those as part of our practice because ultimately, we want to give patients real results, and you just can't get them through energy devices. So another big X across the energy device category as an alternative to facelift. What's the next category? The next category is basically threads. So threads have been around for literally over 20 years. They've hit the market, they've come off the market, they've had a recent sort of rebirth with the PDO threads, which are dissolvable threads. And I mean, talk about a sort of a non-starter. I mean, the idea of putting threads throughout the face to hike the skin and tissue back up onto it, and then have the threads disappear, 3 to 6 months later. I mean, you know where that's going. It's going nowhere. And that's what people who typically get threads notice, is they get a little bit of a short-term improvement, but then it disappears. That doesn't seem like a great use of financial resources, as well as doing something that's technically invasive. I mean, you're putting something in the tissue, so you're at risk of infection and maybe even capturing and catching a nerve, etc. Like, it's just not worth it for something that's not going to give you durability and longevity. So I put a huge X across the thread category. So why is this all important for you as a consumer to understand, as a prospective patient? Because aging is a process, increasing over time, right? I mean, once you start noticing it, say in your 40s, and then it gets worse in your 50s, and it gets even worse in the 60s and in the 70s and so on. What you need to do if you want to look as young as you feel, which is the underlying reason for why people are doing these procedures at all in the first place, is you need to get to the core of the problem, which is the fascia. And that's what a properly done facelift does. Now, in our practice, I don't do a traditional SMAS facelift. I do a technique that I developed called the vertical restore, that has its foundation on the deep plane, which is probably over the last 40 years been defined as the most elaborate and powerful way of shortening the fascia. And especially when you go into this vertical direction, it's basically what you do in the mirror all the time, which is to go up and down like this and say, oh wow, that looks a lot like I used to. And that's what you want. And so there is no way to shorten that fascia other than to get at that fascia layer and basically bring it up. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about the vertical restore and the technical aspects. There's a lot of videos that you can watch after this one that goes into the details of that and will give you a lot more direct information about it. But suffice it to say that if you have laxity, if you catch yourself doing this, don't waste your time, don't waste your money on those type of procedures that are non-surgical. I think after 15 to 20 years of a lot of trial and error, thousands and thousands of thousands, I mean millions and millions of people having tried those procedures, I think we've all learned the limitations and the realities of what those procedures can offer, which is not much in the way of reshaping the face back into position. So in conclusion, the answer is there is no alternative to a facelift. And as sad as that may sound, as depressing, and as I don't want to deflate your hope, but I don't want you making the same mistakes everyone else has. And if you have tried these things and it didn't work, know that those things generally don't work, so it's not just you. And it's not that you're a technician and the technique that was done, they just don't work. I hope with that bit of information, you will be able to navigate a little bit more directly as you try to defy aging and ultimately get yourself to a point where you look as young as you feel. Thank you so much for your attention. I love educating and bringing this type of information to you all. If you like this type of content, hit subscribe to our channel. I drop this type of info 2 times a week to try to bring information about skin and facial rejuvenation and make the entire topic really digestible to ultimately helping you make good decisions for yourself. Please share it with some friends and family. We want to spread the good word. We want to help educate others as well. And if you liked it, hit like. And if you have any questions at all, drop a comment. I will do my best to answer as many of them as possible. All right, guys, until next time, Dr. Amir Karam.